Hello, and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly hangout where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The standard disclaimer applies. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, send questions and comments to our Twitter page at Mason Roundtable, or on our Facebook event page for episode 123, 123, that's Deism. As for introductions, as usual, my name is John Ruark, past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. And I'll hand it off to Nick for his introduction.
I am Nick Johnson, past master, Corinthian Lodge number 67 in Big Time, Farmington.
Glad you can make it here safe tonight, Nick. Lots of storms are brewing out your way.
Oh yeah, the sky was actually not even the right color. It was a yellow-green.
Nice.
Yeah.
So that's your excuse for not combing your hair tonight. Thanks. Robert, introduce yourself, please.
Hey guys, Robert Johnson here from the Whence Came You podcast, past master of Waukegan Lodge number 78 in Waukegan, Illinois, and Deist.
Oh, dun dun dun. Our local resident expert. Thanks for joining us, and last but not least, Jason Richards.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Jason Richards here, your Senior Lodge number 16 in good old Clifton, Virginia. Glad to be with you all tonight.
Thank you, Jason. You just got back from your officers' meeting, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Everything well at Acacia Lodge?
Everything is going great at Acacia Lodge. I did make a couple inflammatory statements about the utility of the Grand Master's official visit coming up, but I'm not going to talk about that any further.
So I've got a great book for you. It's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
By telling people what is and is not a waste of your time.
Right. Great. So let's move into this week's Masonic news. It's been a little light this week, but that's good because we actually had some interesting good news articles. The first and foremost being a very well done production by a Grand Lodge, believe it or not, and that would be the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. They have put together a promotional video, as it were, for Freemasonry, and they've entitled it Back to Our Roots. You can check out the link right now on themasonicroundtable.com for episode 123. We have that video embedded already. And I'm not going to play it here over the air, but it's only a 2-minute long video. Does a really good job of drawing you in of what Masonry is about. And what do you guys think of this production value that they put on?
Dude, their lodge has a pool table.
First thing I noticed, let me tell you, that's awesome.
Also, I'm really interested in 8 videos down, The Secret Destiny of America.
Our occulted destiny. No, we're not talking about that one. We're talking about the very well done one that the Massachusetts Grand Lodge did.
Yeah, it was very much on point. Go ahead, RJ.
They did a few videos, as far as I understand, and they're really, really good about their. Well, as far as I can see, their public relations is really good. Some people, Frater and I talked about it on the program on WCY. He's not a big fan of the amount of PR they do. I kind of like it, as long as it's benign to an extent. Like, this seems like it's still mysterious. You know what I mean? Like, it's a men's fraternity, but it's still somehow mysterious. They don't really go into the dynamics of the teachings or anything. So I think it's kind of interesting. It pulls you in without. They rode the razor's edge. I thought it was good.
Well, and I got to say, I'm glad that they're finally figuring out the one thing that all of these commercials always miss, because for whatever reason they can't explain what a male fraternity is for a modern guy, right? That's always something that most of these commercials miss. They're like, oh, look at George Washington. And I go, I've never met the guy, so I hear he's great. He's everywhere. But that doesn't really do anything for me, 21st century. But this video, I thought it was very well on point. It focused on why do men need fraternity. And maybe they've been reading Bob Davis's book about the modern man, understanding manhood in America, which is great. I think this was on point, just like you're saying, and just because they finally figured out what that hook is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and I think this is probably going to be one of my go-to videos for sharing what Masonry is about, because it does exactly it. It really do a really good job of telling a story in a short 2-minute video, because it starts off a man jogging alone and culminates a character arc, if you will, with him going to lodge in a business suit, wearing an apron, looking clean and sharp, and it shows his character arc of coming from solidarity to fraternal friendship. And I mean, that's what it's really about. And so anyway, go check it out. We've probably talked much longer about it than the actual video itself, but kudos to the message.
One bad part about the video, and that's that at the end of it, it says Massachusetts Freemasonry. And I don't mean like Massachusetts Freemasonry isn't that or whatever, but they branded it for a state, which is great, and it's great for the state because now you know who made the video. But I just wish, like, I hope it's Creative Commons. I should email them. Like, can I just take that off and put Freemasonry on it? Like, U.S. Freemasonry? I wonder if they would be cool with that.
Probably not.
Probably.
Yeah.
But,
Well, that's the thing. Rising tides raise all boats, right? I mean, what's good for Massachusetts, if the rest of the states get the same bump, they're going to get the same bump as well. So
Let's hope.
Let's hope, especially in the internet age. And by the way, as a reminder, tonight's Masonry brought to you by the Masonic Roundtable. We branded it, so why not? Why can't they? Yeah. But we don't take your dues. That's why. Moving on up to your neck of the woods, the windy, blustery neck of the woods that it is. Nick,
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about this Minnesota Masonic Heritage Center.
I'd love to talk about the Minnesota Masonic Heritage Center. Well, it's a beautiful new building that we've just built on the campus of the Minnesota Masonic Home. It's a new building that is going to feature a museum that will hopefully be curated with a lot of items that have come over the last more than 150 years of the Grand Lodge of Minnesota's existence, as well as other items as well. And, as you can see, we had a very nice, large procession into the building. Luckily, it's going to feature banquet halls, that lodge room that you can see right there on the picture, a museum that's named after, I believe, Charles Nelson, who happens to be a past sovereign master of my A&D council. It's got a beautiful auditorium that has more than 350 seats, and it's just a magnificent building. It's beautiful. It's huge. It's available. I think it's for rental as well for other things, weddings, stuff like that. But it's really a great way to let the public see us. In some respects, I worry that this might be viewed as somebody going, "Oh wow, you guys used to exist." Anytime you build a museum,
The museum.
it kind of creates this mystique of, "Oh, you guys were there before, right?" It's like
what a lodge room used to look like. No way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But I think it's really a good use of money, and if you can see those brazen pillars out there, they are quite shiny. I've driven by the building a couple of times, and they are very shiny. But hopefully, tradition prevailing, I will be installed as Sovereign Master in the lodge room there in December. So if you are available around, AMD guys, I will be there. We're going to be conferring the superintendent degree at that particular place, and I'm really excited to be able to check it out, because from what I understand, every Masonic body, a lodge, chapter, what have you, is allowed one rental of the lodge room for free each year, is what I've heard. So definitely take advantage of that if you are a Minnesota Mason.
Excellent. Cool. So let's go into our next topic, our next item up on the agenda, which is everyone's favorite Masonic Trivia game show called the Masonic Monday Question.
On Tuesday!
On Tuesday.
Thank you, Nick. Go ahead, take it away.
Whoa, that was so frightening. I don't know what to do with myself.
Change
All
your
right.
pants after the show.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we had some really good answers from last week. The answer was King Athelstan, who was in fact the first king of England, also known as the first king of the Anglo-Saxons. He was defeated later on by the Danes. But he is in fact mentioned in the Regis manuscript as the king that we were referring to. So congratulations to Jason Richards,
Woo!
Keane, Heber Longhurst, Ted Potter, Seth Lewis, Joey Boyer, Bob King, Michael Laidlaw, Darius Butler, or Darius, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. And I think that's it. If I missed you, I apologize. I think Robert also answered it correctly, so did John, so did everybody, because you guys all are awesome. All right, so we'll move right into the Masonic Monday question for
On
the
Tuesday.
week of July 4th. That's right, Independence Day, the day that we defeated the aliens. You're welcome, world.
20
This
years
week's
ago,
question.
1996.
Welcome to Earth.
Boom. And then all of a sudden they release a new movie and it's like terrible. I don't know. It hurts my heart. But that's okay. I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist, kind of like Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions. So we'll be okay. Anyway, this week's question is, Freemasons have been involved in many aspects of the Federal District, aka the District of Columbia. Many theories have been made about what role Freemasonry played in the founding of the United States of America. One example of our role is traced to the literal founding of the district, the placing of the first boundary stone of that district. Your question, which lodge laid the first cornerstone of the district, and what was the name of the presiding master of that ceremony? When you have the answer, send it to masonicmonday@gmail.com. Don't forget to include your lodge name, lodge number, and the hashtag There's Only One Independence Day movie. Back to you, John.
Denial's a great thing. Let's move into
Beautiful river. I love it.
the beautiful river. Denial. Aha!
Ooh.
Funny guy. Let's go into deism, which is tonight's topic. And we have kicked around the idea. We've done a couple of episodes of religion and masonry and a little bit of the anti-Masonic religious movement. But this one tonight we're going to talk about specifically a branch of religion that has come up in conversations and the myths that surround Freemasonry of, is it a deistic fraternity? Does it have deistic values? I guess deistic might be the wrong word there. And so I think one thing we're trying to do tonight is kind of outline what deism is, and I think that's kind of a complicated answer, and we'll get to that in a second. And then really how it relates to Freemasonry, what happened during the formation of Freemasonry and some of the founding fathers and Enlightenment era Freemasons. So let's start with Robert Johnson, who can attempt to, as our resident deist, give us an introduction of what deism is in 15 minutes or less.
Because God
Right.
totally created the world and took a nap. And that's what happened.
Maybe. So deism is lots of camps, right? So it's just like any umbrella term. So you have under Christianity, right? There's several different types. I guess you've got Catholicism and Protestants and Lutherans, and you've got all these things underneath that. You've got, I'm sure, different types of Buddhism. You've got different types of Gnosticism. So deism, at its core root, I would argue its original intent is, I would maybe call this three stances. One, that the religion is essentially any revealed religion. Define revealed religion as any religion that has a prophet or God revealed himself to a man or a group of people or whatever is rejected. So there is no revealed religion, utterly rejected. The second portion of that is that God is provable through observation of man and nature. So we don't need the revealed religion per se to argue that God exists. We don't need a gospel. There's no churches for deism, even though there is a deist church. So I mean, I guess that's a quick jump into it. I'll leave you with that.
So what's your take on it then? How about that? Why don't we go a little bit more specific to your...
My own personal... So deism kind of over time has split into camps, right? In that I think there's camps in deism, like there's Christian deists. And I think at one time I may have identified it with that. And I think those camps come about so that, let's say you're a gentleman who grows up in a Catholic family, yet you identify deist, but how can you still relate to your family? I'll call myself a Christian deist. So for me, like, I think it was an evolution of moving away. I mean, I grew up. I went through all my schools growing up were primarily private schools until I exited those and went into public schools. And those private schools, there's not really a private school that I know of that doesn't have a religious core. And so I grew up that way, kind of in the church and in a private academy. And so as I studied in my college classes and going along, I gradually moved away from those things and I went into a pure realm of kind of agnosticism, which that's not Gnosticism, agnosticism, which is the proverbial fence sitter. I don't know either way. And I moved into deism, which, again, I believe in an existence of a something bigger than what we are, but we also don't have anything that's mystical, so there's no, like, miracles and there's no magic stuff, right? There is whatever God is kind of an interesting term that we'll use because it's not always a God, right? It maybe just be defined loosely as the creative force of the universe, or it could just be a biological entity much larger than us living on another plane. Put a drop on a petri dish in his world, and here we are. So that is the loose, kind of translation. So my own personal stance is I'm also what's known as what originally was just deism and people would call atheism in the 16th century. But now there's camps. There's cold deism and there's warm deism. Cold deism is God is the Ron Popeil model. You set it and forget it. So God or whatever created this reality that we play in, and then he walked away. He has no intervention whatsoever. We're on our own. This is where we are.
So I'm glad you brought that up because I've heard it describe a theory or the watchmaker analogy that he designed the universe, a creator designed the universe, and then just let it unwind, and so that's why we can experience it, especially with our laws of physics. We can, as we talked about in some of our 7 liberal arts and science episodes, how mathematics and reason really help describe creation.
Right.
But that could have been because it was predetermined to follow these formulas as it carries out. What do you guys think of that? Or what, Robert, you specifically?
Well, so to that end, right? So the other side is this warm side of deism where God has intervention. I'm personally of the mindset that I'm more of a cold deist. I don't believe in any kind of intervention. However, I do believe in what a lot of people will call a program. I believe mathematics and probability give us everything we have, and is the construct in which we live. But I also feel we have, so it's kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure book. there's a set number of points where we're going to get to, but we make lots of our own choices along the way, but the end is predetermined. So for me, I believe in free will to the end point. You know, whatever we are in the program, eventually, you know, it ends the same for all of us. We all die. We have free will.
You subscribe to the thought of what Elon Musk has been talking about how it's because of the laws of the infinite universes that are out there and the length of the universe, we have to be living in a program right now.
Well, so at the Asimov conference just recently that was out, you know, is a renowned panel. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson was the moderator, and all of them agreed, you know, the strict adherence that, you know, through observable nature, this is how a deist will define God's existence. Through observable nature, everything can be written as mathematics. Mathematics is a code. Ipso facto, we live in a program.
It's very Cartesian.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting talking about cold versus warm deism, because really when you talk about classical deism, the deism of Locke and to a lesser extent Descartes, but also one of the primary founders of, or the earliest proponents of the deist movement in England was Lord Herbert of Cherbury, about 1648. That was his death. You know, they were very, very strict at adherence to cold deism. Look, everything is rational, and we have some innate knowledge of the supernatural, but that supernatural being does not interact. And it's interesting to see how that has morphed to a kinder, gentler, more feel-goody type of warm deism throughout the ages, where yes, there is some interaction, but at the same time, God does not reveal him or herself directly to the people in his creation.
Go ahead, Nick. You look like you have something to say.
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting too. Is, you know, the biggest thing about deism, at least when I was learning about it, you know, obviously as a young man, I was bouncing from religion to religion, place to place, trying to figure out where I belonged in this world, as we all do. And I think deism really fit in my early 20s, just because conceptually it was this idea that I was in charge of my own place, my own time. And then, you know, it was kind of interesting. I spent a lot of time in French class. So minors was going to be in French language. I don't know why. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. But, you know, it was kind of interesting that, you know, when you discuss the French Revolution and, you know, going through it, you know, deism had started as this kind of, it had already existed before it, but during the Age of Enlightenment, it was really grabbed onto by a lot of those thinkers. Hume, who might have or might have not been, Voltaire, who obviously expressed a lot of deistic type theories, and it was kind of interesting that, you know, as the Age of Enlightenment then opened up into the French Revolution and all that stuff, and Robespierre, something that a lot of people don't realize is that when all these radical changes were happening in France, it first started, there was a cult of reason, and it was essentially this big atheistic thoughts, you know, focused on human beings, right? And then Robespierre grabbed onto deism, right, as essentially a way to replace Catholicism completely, and he was trying to actually create essentially a state religion using what was called the Culte de l'Être Suprême, which was the cult of the Supreme Being. And, you know, it's kind of interesting that deism, which is this idea that God is not really interacting in this world necessarily, you know, whether it's hot or cold, you know, the interaction is not the same. But, you know, Robespierre latched onto it and tried to turn it into this very, very strict state religion. And I just thought that was, this idea of weaponizing, something that's so hands off was just so surprising when I was reading about it.
It's militant theosophy.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing, And for a while, deism was very much in vogue, and I think it started to really dissipate. And the people you can blame, I guess, are the Wesleyans, the Methodists of the world, and the Pietists, where this idea of a distant God, whether it was a God within the church, that was distant, and the priest stood and looked at him along with everyone else and was completely distant, was replaced with a very personal God. And so deism, it still exists, obviously. We have one on the panel, but it went through this very high form, and then it finally kind of went away when there was a change to a personalized God. And I always thought that was kind of fascinating,
So bringing this back to Masonry, went back and looked at Mackey's encyclopedia, and he does have a listing for deism. It's only a couple paragraphs long. I'm going to kind of summarize it here, where he tries to address the notion that deism influenced the foundation of Freemasonry. And he says, while there have been many Enlightenment thinkers, and again, you can go back and reference episode 62 of the Masonic Roundtable, where we talk about the Enlightenment philosophy and some of those men who were also Freemasons. By taking a lot of the stuff from John Locke and Voltaire, then one could assume that open-mindedness for religion was a foundation for Freemasonry. However, he says, well, that really kind of debunks it right away when you look at Anderson's Constitution. Anderson himself being, I forgot what faith he was part of. It was a Christian group, but he says if you look at the charges adopted at the revival in 1717, and which was published in the Constitutions of Freemasonry in 1793, it says, a Mason is obliged by his tenure to obey the moral law, and if he rightly understands the art, he will never be a stupid atheist nor an irreligious libertine, where the words irreligious libertine refer to the freethinkers or deists of that period. So it is evident then that the deists could have had no influence at that time in molding the Masonic organization. I think what made me jump off of that was the word libertine. I've heard people and seen people post things in Masonic groups and forums about the word libertine, especially when it was relating to a lot of the things that was going on with the homosexuality of the craft this time last year. But when you look at it in the context of in which Anderson wrote the constitutions, it was more of the free thinkers and less of the hedonistic kind of attitudes that were going on at the time. So libertine in that context meant more deist than sexual deviant. Robert?
So what's interesting about that kind of thing is that there's always there's always a push against free thinkers. Thomas Paine wrote a book called The Age of Reason. Part 2, page 129, has a great quote, and take it for what you will. It says, as priestcraft was always the enemy of knowledge because priestcraft supports itself by keeping people in delusion and ignorance, it was consistent with its policy to make the acquisition of knowledge a real sin. So what I find interesting about that quote and the talking about how free thinkers or irreligious libertines can't be Masons, it's almost as if to say we don't want anybody who's going to come in here and shake anything up because cognitive dissonance.
True. You damn well better buy what I'm selling. I mean, that's
Pamphlets.
And it doesn't take much to look into the old charges, look into the constitutions and the way they were written, and think about how the ancients and moderns split. It was really based on Trinitarian Christianity vice inclusion of other religious faiths and toleration. So
Rick Berman would argue the point that politics was very heavily involved there too, but I'll let it slide.
partially. So
Well,
it was very Christian in that time frame of 1770. Very, even sometimes even Trinitarian, and even one could argue close to Catholicism, because that's what was the primary religion at the time.
well, and I would argue that a lot of the language that was taken, Dr. Anderson himself was a Presbyterian minister, and so you find Calvinist terms such as supreme being. Supreme being is a very Calvinist term. It's very interesting to see these sprinklings of I guess I'll go even broader out. Freemasonry is very good at hoovering things up. We take a lot of information, repackage it, and give it out. So I think it makes a lot of sense that somebody would view Freemasonry as a deistic type of institution, only because it probably at some point in its time picked that up. And so you see that in a lot of this stuff. And so, since all of us come into it in our own chain of union, we're one link in that chain coming together, it's not surprising to me that we bring in our own tendencies, our own beliefs in some respects. So, it makes sense that deism fits so well within the Masonic context for a lot of guys that are in fact deists,
I think
because it just fits that way.
I think it's only there though, Nick. I mean, because people associate Freemasonry with the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment is one of the areas in history in which deism, well, formal deism as it was called, I mean, back then it was considered almost atheism, was pushed to the forefront so that you could be recognized as a deist. And so I think there's this idea of free thinking, this idea of philosophy of the Enlightenment period, and then they just necessarily kind of think that it just goes right along with Freemasonry. And that's also due in part because some of the founding fathers, not all, like everybody says, were known to be deists. Thomas Jefferson has the Jefferson Bible, where it's basically the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth, but without any of the miracles, without the mysticism, with nothing. It's just this is the guy, this is what he did, this is how he died.
And it was always so funny with Jefferson, you point to him, and he's very much, a lot of deistic tendencies, but that he immediately announced himself as, I'm a Unitarian, I promise. Well, just kidding, I'm Episcopalian, but really I'm a Unitarian. But I like deism. But I'm a Unitarian.
Well, and the thing is, vis-a-vis the founding of the fraternity, the tenets of deism and other revealed religions are not mutually exclusive, right? So you can't say that the idea of religious tolerance and separation of church and state are exclusive to one particular faith tradition. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer for Anderson to call out irreligious libertines as people who or as Mackey says, people who would have no impact on the founding of the fraternity. Because good ideas are good ideas.
Right, and I don't think there's really, as far as religious toleration, we are tolerant. I'm sorry, deists are tolerant of others' religions. It is what they do, but deists typically don't proselytize. However, the interesting thing is that there is almost nothing within deism that is compatible with any other religion. In fact, I would invite you all to check it out at some point for some reading if you would like. There is actually there's a website. It's the World Union of Deists. It's deism.com. And all you got to do is look at their main menu to understand, just as Jason said, how militant Deism is. I mean,
They hate everybody.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's pretty. It can be upsetting to many religious groups. I would definitely stress that if you go to this website, know that you might feel challenged or you might feel upset with the website. I mean, there are things in here, Albert Einstein and religion. There's things about Voltaire. There's deism and consciousness. But then, of course, there's other articles that have some real kind of, I don't even agree with how kind of in your face some of these are. Protecting children from the Bible. I mean, that's an article on here. So there are the fraud of faith healing. You know, there says Quran problems. Thomas Jefferson versus Pat Robinson. Did Jesus really exist? So there's all kinds of stuff on here, and I don't particularly enjoy the way this is very in your face.
They also use capital letters to like promote emphasis.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? You're writing your site like you're a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
LOL.
The site is not the 2016 type of site. It's very
GeoCities-esque.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and there's also a really good subreddit. That's kind of where I was picking up a lot of my info. There's a subreddit, reddit.com/r/deism, and that one's I found it very, very enlightening. It's not a large one by any means. It's only got about 3,200, as they call them, cogs, not subscribers. But you
Wow.
know, it actually was really interesting because, like you were pointing out, hot and cold. This idea of the deity being hot or cold, you could see both of those tendencies in all these things. Some people asking for prayer requests, while other people were like, how does one understand God if He doesn't reveal Himself? You know, it was very much like this back and forth trying to work it out, and I found it absolutely intellectually stimulating to go through all those posts.
That is a big thing with deism is, they say God gave us reason, not religion. It's kind of their tagline. And the issue, I think, is it's very intellectual in the form of breaking things down. It tries to destroy, any concept through logical reason and rhetoric, while trying to maintain its argument of God is visible through the observation of nature. And I wanted to make sure I just put this out there, and I'll give it back to you, John. So there's a lot of talk about atheism, right? And I think there's a statistic out there that says, between 1991 and 2001, deism grew by 771% in the United States. And what I attribute that to is the knowing the difference between atheism and deism. I personally believe that most atheists are actually deists. I think an atheist doesn't believe in concept A, therefore he's an atheist. But I think if you're an atheist out there and you're listening to this program and you want to be a Mason or whatever, and you believe in anything at all that created or spawned some beginning to what we live in, anything at all, you're a deist. Sorry.
Even flying spaghetti monster.
It's if you're a flying spaghetti monster.
That's Pastafarianism.
So it's time to hang up the atheist hat. Sorry.
And come join the Masons.
And come join. To be one, ask Jason Richards.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the famous Freemasons that were deist. We have Voltaire, which we talked about earlier, was a known deist, but then, of course, we talked about Voltaire in our Enlightenment philosophy episode, in which it was really almost months before he died when he became a Freemason. and was conducted by a fellow brother deist, which was Benjamin Franklin, was his conductor. So Benjamin Franklin being a staunch deist at the time, but even then was, I guess, what you would say more on the warm deist side, in which he admitted to the possibility of intervention by a higher power.
Well, you know, that's not that uncommon even in that era, because we look at like John Locke and some of the foundational thinkers that promoted the concept of deism, and even then, you know, John Locke was strict classical cold deist, but in his writings he says, okay, I actually, you know, make an appeal to the deity as to whether or not I should publish this book. So even then, Locke was, you know, espousing a philosophy of cold deism while himself believing in interventionism.
Thomas Paine did the same thing. He waffled. If you'll find quotes where he'll say he believes in the one God, right? Because there's pandeism as well. Like people might believe in multiple beings, anything that created but not revealed. So he'll say, I believe in the one true being, and when I die, I hope I have a happy afterlife. And that's kind of interesting, right? Because then later on he makes mention of, I really don't care about an afterlife because it, blah, 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 deism, no heaven, no hell, there's no reward afterlife thing. It's just you do what you do, which is the right thing because it's the right thing, not for a reward. So he waffles too. It's I think it was just a evolving thought process. Maybe they're agnostic. Maybe they got confused. Maybe they weren't deists.
They needed to give themselves a label for something.
Well, there's so many these days.
Right.
They were the religious hipsters of the Enlightenment. Deist, brah.
We didn't acknowledge God before it was cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the last thing I wanted to mention was, you know, again the theory or myth of were the founding fathers deist, and a good book that can dispel some of that myth was a well-researched book by David L. Holmes, who is from the College of William and Mary, and he actually did his homework, and in the thesis of his book on page 134, he says that the founding fathers fell into three religious categories. The smallest group, who had left their Judeo-Christian heritages and became advocates of the Enlightenment religion of nature, were deists. The next largest group the next smallest group were practicing Christians, and then the largest group of founders retained their Christian loyalties and practice, but were influenced by deism. So it's a trick question that they actually were Christians, but because of the Enlightenment discussions, the Enlightenment era, they were open to becoming, I guess, something along the lines of deistic Christians.
Right.
And again, it's not mutually exclusive.
Right.
You can be a good person and be a Christian. You can be a good person and be a deist.
Unless you're an irreligious
Richard
libertine.
Dawkins.
Hey, there you go.
But you can't join Freemasonry if you are, unless you want to, you know, join irregular. That's cool with me too.
Okay, so let's go over to social media. I think it's been kind of late tonight, but good conversation on the page. Jason, what have we got?
Well, we've got a couple good questions here. The first one I have to go to, though, is actually something that we talked about in the green room before the show kicked off. From Brother Chris Streeper, says deists are really the libertarians of the religious world, both of which, by the way, make excellent Masons, at least fundamentally. And we talked about that exact thing in the green room. It's really funny because you know, as I said before, it's like, wow, you know, libertarians hate all things. Loosely paraphrasing. Deists hate everybody. It's like, you're stupid atheists because you don't believe in God. You're stupid Christians because you believe that God's word is revealed.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but you get the point.
And if you're offended now, wait till our politics and Freemasonry episode.
Oh God.
I want that to be great.
That's
I
episode
want to
300.
tell you about the 1% of the 2% of all the Freemasons are the 1%. The 2%.
Nick, that is the best impression ever.
Oh man.
Let me tell you about the millionaires and the billionaires of Freemasonry. They
The
all live in the
subtitle
Scottish
for the subtitle for that episode is Why TMR Wasn't Invited to the Tricentennial.
We weren't.
I'm just kidding, but really. So moving on, here's a question from Brother Mike Hambrecht up in Ohio. What volume of sacred law does a deist take the oath on?
Great question. I would probably, I just took it on the Bible because I didn't care. Like, it's just a symbol to me. But I almost wonder, like, if you would use a Jefferson Bible or a science book.
How about this?
I don't know.
What about a blank book?
A blank book? Yeah,
Because the book in and of itself, in its existence being something you can observe, naturally points to a creator. Thus, the book there is a symbol of the divine and your connection with God.
I would support that. In fact, I think the blank book idea is fascinating. I think you turned me on to that a while ago, citing something. I can't remember what it was, but I do like the blank book idea. I've also heard taking an oath upon a mirror.
Wow. That's
Narcissist.
Yeah.
right here. God's right here. So actually, one of the old Tyler talks about that. Not the mirror, but the blank book kind of thing, in the sense that an oath is really not binding because of the book beneath your hand. It's the spirit with which you assume an obligation which makes it binding. The book is but a symbol, just like you guys said, that you make your promise in the presence of the God you revere.
That must be like the only non-racist Tyler talk I've ever heard.
Only Tyler talk I actually like. I agree.
Yeah.
Come here, young man. I gotta talk to you about a little thing called Freemasonry.
Do it in your Bernie voice.
Let me tell you about the 1% of all of my stories not racist.
Oh man, that's classic. Oh, I'm impressed, Nick.
These guys. No, man, I'm working on Trump. So next episode, I might have Trump for you. So.
Okay. So that's about all we've got for social media. We did have some really good comments and questions there. So thanks so much, everybody, for asking those. I think they promoted some good discussion and silly voices.
Let's start with Nick to take us home then. Nick, what have you got? Final thoughts.
It's kind of interesting. For me, deism was like a 2-year phase. It was one of those that I bounced in and out of a lot of things. And it was kind of an interesting philosophy, so focused on reason. And ultimately, I kind of stopped only because I kept running into the problem of evil issue that always comes up. And it was just hard for me to reconcile so many different things. So all of a sudden I had one of those C.S. Lewis, hit on the heads. Didn't write a long book about it. But, it was just kind of an interesting, I still have a lot, I still take a lot of really good understandings of it, particularly a focus on reason and thinking for yourself, and really focusing on the free will that you have been given on this particular blue pearl that we've all been so wonderfully given. And the one fear I always have, and I guess I shouldn't, because you should never really care about your critics. We're charged that in, I believe, the Fellowcraft charge, that you're not supposed to palliate the offenses of those that don't know about the craft. paraphrasing. And oftentimes very fundamentalist Christians will point that finger at us, saying, "Oh, this is just a terrible, terrible organization. It's deist. There's no belief in here at all. It's just a bunch of deists taking deist things, and the next step from deism is Satanism somehow. I don't know." And so it's kind of interesting that we both embrace a lot of the good parts of it, focusing on reason and thinking. But then we don't really defend the fact that we're also of many different faiths, and I think that's the one thing that's always missed. I have brothers that are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, even some guys in OTO, which I know some people just screamed hearing. And it's just cool, we can all exist, and that's the one thing that Freemasonry does. It's not teaching a single concept of how to understand God. In fact, it's complete opposite. It's bringing us all together without that baggage, and I think that's something that gets lost. But yeah, it's a really fascinating subject, and I definitely recommend people looking into it, even if you're just looking into the history of how thought and philosophy moved forward in this world and continues to work that way. So I have a blog, millennialfreemason.com. Stuff is actually going to be happening soon. I might be coming out of cryogenic frosting, I don't know. A word that means in a chamber of ice. Whoa. Notice I have to get back to writing because I don't even know how to speak well anymore. Good God.
If it weren't for all these words, I could get my point across. Thank you.
If I only had 1% of 2% of the words in the dictionary, I'd be good.
Where's the mute button? Okay, Jason. Thanks, Nick.
So, getting back to kind of the core concept behind this episode of, is Freemasonry a deist institution? Does it espouse deist religion, deist philosophy? I think we've argued enough here to where we can really say no. Freemasonry, yes, it has been stripped down to the religion in which all men agree, as it were, just by stepping away from religion itself and saying, look, outside of your belief in a supreme being, that your faith is left up to you. And there's also no judgment made anywhere in the tenets of Freemasonry or the Masonic ritual that passes judgment on a particular sectarian faith. And I think that's what really segregates the Masonic fraternity from deism in and of itself. There's no judgment there on the faith of brethren, whether they be revealed religions of the book or others. And in addition to the fact that, of course, Freemasonry espouses no dogma, etc. But really, when you get down to it, Freemasonry is a place for men to go to make themselves better, both in the eyes of their fellow man and in the eyes of their God. And knowing a little bit more about deism now than before this episode, it's just interesting to see different walks and different faith traditions and how they all fit together in the fraternity, and it's a really beautiful thing to see what each man and each faith brings. With that, check out the Midnight Freemasons if you haven't, because my latest article was published on Friday, and it was pretty good, I think. At least I started a new series called Masonic Oddities, and it's really one crazy person's guide to Masonry in places you wouldn't necessarily expect to find it. So check it out, www.themidnightfreemasons.org, and come back next week and we'll have another good show for you. Thanks, Sean.
Cool. Back to our resident deist, Robert Johnson.
So everything Jason said. Yeah, deism, while we had dudes in Freemasonry who were deists in the beginning, who had deist leanings and all these things, that still didn't have any place in the lodge. I think one of the catalysts on this episode was people questioned about deism, and people saying exactly what John posed at the beginning: is deism, injected in Freemasonry? Is Freemasonry inherently deist? And the answer is no. We have some interesting parallels, from Enlightenment thinking and philosophy, sure. But no, Masonry does not equal deism or vice versa. If you're curious about deism, that website is good at points. There is an interesting article. There's a section called Why Deism, and it's really just a bunch of testimonials about somebody was agnostic and they turned to deism or whatever. There's interesting articles on here. Again, some of them are abrasive, and I would urge caution. It's not. I don't want to tell you to go read something and then, give you some life crisis. I would hope everybody is really firm and sure in their own personal beliefs, because that is something that's so personal to everybody. Is these flavors of deism and Christianity and Judaism and everything. Religion is individual, and individual is just as many as people are on the planet. So everybody's got a different spin. So I hope you don't think ill of me or think I shouldn't have become a Mason or whatever. I'll leave you with just the last quote, which is what deism is purported on that website. It says, "Deism is a recognition of a universal creative force greater than that demonstrated by mankind, supported by personal observation of laws and designs in nature and the universe, perpetuated and validated by the innate ability of human reason, coupled with the rejection of claims made by individuals and organized religions of having received special divine revelation." The point I'd like to focus on, though, is universal creative force greater than that demonstrated by mankind. What I love about that is kind of what we talk about: the fatherhood of God under the brotherhood of man. So I guess that's maybe a parallel that we have in common, but again, not a deist organization by any means. So thanks so much for watching. I appreciate you listening to me ramble on about things, and I always learn a lot. Like, Nick's perspective was just so great this evening. Thank you, Nick, for sharing. And I love Jason's bow tie. You guys really need to check that out. If you zoom in, it's a Minerval owl. And his Oddities series is top-notch. You guys got to check it out. Thanks again.
Thank you, Robert. And I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So yeah, I learned a lot as well. I always enjoy this. I always get different perspectives, so learned way too much that I thought I'd ever learn about deism in a short amount of time, with links of where to go to learn more. To sum it up, Freemasonry is not a religion, if you're new joining us here. So that's step one. So then, by extension, if deism is a religion, then Freemasonry also cannot be deistic in value, or deistic at its core from a salvation standpoint, but may have some parallels, as Robert mentioned. So we have debunked the theory that there are most of the founding fathers were deist, but we can say that they were at least influenced by the Enlightenment and deist ideas. And that's all. I hope you enjoyed the show. See you next week. Thanks for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.